Smash has had a wide variety of stages since the original Nintendo 64 title in 1999, from fairly standard layouts to what the hell is happening. Every stage has its own charm, whether it be casually, competitively, or some weird in the middle area. That doesn't matter because the stage is nice to look at. Every gimmick is easy to grasp and doesn't take away too much from the actual game. Like the stage flips every so often, it's not that big a deal, is it? I think the most distracting gimmick really is platforming levels, something that actively takes your focus off of fighting just so you can stay ahead of the screen. But honestly, I don't think that's too bad now. Even the earliest scrolling stages in the series had slow points to let actual scrapping commence, and I think the design practice carried over to Brawl 2. The stages were more chaotic, but they were still fun in their own right. By Smash 4, I think scrolling stages brew the best balance between fighting and platforming with dedicated stop spots, with these areas likewise having their own unique layouts and hazards. Then there's Pac-Land. I have no idea how to describe Pac-Land. It's just another platformer stage like 3D Land and Dreamland, and this game's just a bunch of lands really, have some originality. But this one is just wrong. To get started, this stage is based on Pac-Man. Yeah, you know, that Pac-Man. Let's just assume we're only going off of what the Smash stage gives us. We start at Pac-Man's crib and stroll through a town, then a forest, then a leaky fortress. Here's a fairy. Head back through some mountains, now you're back home. Right then, every cycle is about 2 minutes of travelling through the same stage every time, only there's a time of day change at the start of each new loop. It doesn't affect the stage any more than visuals, and realistically nobody's gonna see it because everyone dies before the first loop ends. The actual scroll does depend on the positioning of players though. The closer everyone is to the end of screen, the faster the stage will scroll. There's a couple of hazards like hydrants and water spurts, but the biggest problem for play really is just the overall stage design. Firstly, there's only 2 stop spots on a loop, which is fine, they're spaced out and evenly work, but both are really brief and take place on simple flat space. Now I would be okay with this if it was my only complaint. I don't need to call somebody and vent to them about the atrocities of Pac-Land's level design all night. But the platforming itself is just really janky, especially in the latter parts of the level where there's some really specific jumps that just don't feel suited to the flow of Smash's controls. Good job. I will admit though, it is funny, I got stuck in this pit and barely managed to escape before the scroll caught up to me. I don't think anybody else in the match noticed, but I just loved that I was struggling for my life trying to climb a pit while everybody else was fighting. Outside of that though, I think the camera position doesn't particularly help, and realistically there's not enough space for anybody to fit on the screen for a decent fight, let alone 4 people. Wait.
Pac-Man! 3, 2, 1, go!
You think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
So, in summary, I think it's a neat concept, but the layout of the stage and Smash's controls just don't make it work. And the on-screen space, it throws it all off, honestly. One thing to note though is that you can actually remedy the screen space issue using the fixed camera option in Special Smash, but nobody plays that. My final verdict, fun concept, but there's too many minor flaws that get in the core gameplay, and it still doesn't answer my question of what the hell is happening. Where's the ghost? The fruit? Who's this geezer? To get over this, I thought, hey, let's look at the original title to really explain the context behind the stage's design. But that was a pain. Firstly, Pac-Man had a cartoon in 1982. Who knew? Hanna-Barbera made it, you know, the Flintstones people. Following its release, Namco set out to develop a game based on the animated series, which resulted in Pac-Land. To be perfectly honest, I don't really see any connection between Pac-Land the game and Pac-Man the animated show, other than featuring the yellow guy, Clyde something. The world's design is loosely based on the series though, with colourful backgrounds being specifically chosen to reflect the nature of the show, and character designs can see inspiration taken from their appearance on the TV show. One more notable connection between the series and Pac-Land though is the main theme of the game being pretty much taken from the animated series. Those with a keen ear might have noticed that the song is entirely absent from Smash, and I believe the reason for that is because the song is owned by Hanna-Barbera as opposed to Namco, which might also explain the limited release of the title, but it just makes the placement of it in Smash even more peculiar. Still though, there were ports outside of the original arcade release, but my god are they confusing. There was a port to the Nintendo Famicom, but you can certainly tell creative liberties had to be taken. Proportions are just completely off, and it's honestly kinda sad to see how much they had to downgrade the title. It never ended up releasing overseas until a port on the Wii U Virtual Console decades later of all places, to which it was released to a critical okay from most reviewers. There was also a port for the TurboGrafx 16, which was more in tone with the original arcade release, but even then, that's kind of obscure, and trust me, it gets madder. Commodore 64, Amiga computers, it was on the Atari Lynx of all systems. I'm sure that saved Atari from certain doom. It had an LCD game. And despite that, it was still a pain to actually track down a copy to play that wasn't NIS. After some extensive research, I discovered the game was included on the Namco Museum collection on the original PlayStation, Volume 4 specifically. Yes, I'm aware this is a Nintendo video. Does that help? Before getting into Pac-Land specifically, I'd like to talk about some interesting points I found in Namco's museum. It's basically a pack of games that are alright. It is Volume 4, so that is being stretched a bit. But also on the disc is a little 3D interactive museum area. Each game in the pack has a dedicated room to look at concept art and other assets for each game. Saying that, it's enough trouble looking at these on a HD screen, imagine trying to view it on a CRT when it originally released. Ooh. Pac-Land's room is probably the worst because it's on this moving bridge which keeps bobbing up and down. But there's also this beach room where you can see Pac-Man at the beach with his painting. Not gonna lie though, he looks like he's having a great time. I'd love to get in with him. By the way, there's this icon of Pac-Man in the corner of the screen which is animated perfectly in line with your movement when you're wandering about. It's safe to assume that implies you're playing as Pac-Man, so with that knowledge, let this sink in. Oh look, an arcade machine. Walking up to it and interacting with it starts up Pac-Land to play, so with all this meandering about out of the way, let's actually take a proper look at Pac-Land. Yep, it's the Smash stage. Fake ending gag aside, Pac-Land is a platforming game, and a weird one at that. Pac-Land released in 1984, so to see a platforming game period was quite ambitious at the time. Although, it's far from perfect. Pac-Man has a lot of traction. After releasing the move button, he just walks off for a while by himself. It's like he's in some soggy soil. And jumping is heavy, like a camel vomiting out its afternoon lunch heavy. I don't even know what that means, but I'm sticking with it. I wouldn't say that's a bad thing, but it's jarring when compared to the modern standard. You also don't have a lot of control in the air, so it's better to calculate and commit to a jump rather than going in haphazardly or else
You will die.
Combined with the weird slippy movement, there's a lot of times where you just plummet straight to your death. Cool. As for the levels themselves, they're each split up into 4 segments, 3 trips towards the end and 1 to return back from the ferry. The first 3 are all standard platforming, but the last sees you gain access to these boots which essentially let you jump indefinitely. They're a bit fiddly to control though, so you can't just skip over everything, and while some return trips are a lot of fun to rush through, others are just absolute pains where the gravity can ruin you at any moment. The first stage of Pac-Land is pretty simple platforming through a town, later on you stroll through a forest, and at the end you go off to rolling logs on a falling bridge, which isn't actually that hard to get across. The only real hazard at this point is the ghosts flying around, and they're pretty easy to avoid, more so just being a pressure tool to get you to push down the timer. Oh yeah, should probably mention that each level has a time limit on it, and being an arcade game this makes a lot of sense. The second level starts back in the town, there's more ghosts and they bring in double-decker buses to jump over, but overall the starting segment is fairly easy. There's also a new section introduced featuring these jump pads and they're just such a pain to use. Nice one, Pac-Man. You're also introduced to this fort area, which you'll recognise from Smash. Ghosts won't show up here, with the main hazard instead being spurts of water. Stage 3 is where things just go mental. Ghosts get a lot more chaotic and they're a much bigger pain to avoid. There's also this. What? The quicksand is genuinely just like the worst thing ever. Like actually, I just blatantly hate it. I only got past it because pure luck. In the arcades, this probably saved the US economy with how many coins it sucked. Ironic, coming from quicksand. The end of stage 3 introduces these moving clouds which give an experience of pure platforming, and honestly it's a really refreshing change in pace. Loose because of the controls, but not too stressful. It's a bit stressful. On the next level there's this entirely unique asset introduced, being this odd maze area. It's just 3 platforms you have to navigate around and find keys to open doors, although for the most part you can just rush through without the keys. This section is pretty much just to waste the time on the clock with the backtracking, but it's not really hard honestly. And the blatant end, that's pretty much the extent of Pac-Land. After that, the same assets are pretty much reused in different combinations to create more challenge, but there's nothing particularly new introduced. Pac-Land is a questionable oddity. The original Pac-Man is simple to pick up on any platform. You can change the layout, you could add PAL, you could completely knacker it all together, but at the end of the day, it's an easy to pick up and play game. Pac-Land seems to be trying to do the same thing with the platformer genre, and while it's good in its own right, it's by no means easy to pick up and play. It requires a lot more focus and attention, which again is fine, but for an arcade title with the tight time restrictions it has, Pac-Land is a bit of a frustrating blunder. As for the Smash stage, not only is it a faithful recreation, but it's fun, obviously when played casually, but I feel like more than 2 people just clutter it too much. I've played 1v1s on this stage for over an hour looking into the topic, and I genuinely enjoyed it a lot, but it was already hard enough to actually fight. Adding more players just made everything a mess, although admittedly this was probably better than hours of hardly missing every other attack trying to focus on the platforming. The Famicom version is amazing in its own right though. I mean, look at Pac-Man, man looks right in place on the Mr. Man show.